Welcome to Unboxed. I'm your host, Connie Nam, the founder of Astrid Miyu. In these conversations, I speak to the founders of some of the most innovative, bold, and exciting businesses to discover the person behind the brand and what it took for them to build their empires. Today, we have a very special episode. I'll be interviewed by Charlie Perry, who's the founder of Astrid Productions, who is the producer of this Unboxed podcast. We'll be talking about how I came up with Astrid Miyu, how I grew it, how I got investment, and how I scaled it to where it is. This is a journey and it's a lifestyle. You have to have had savings. You need to be willing to work. As a founder, you're an athlete. You kind of dip into everything. You're doing everything. I had a very clear vision. I wanted to make this a cult global brand, and I wanted to do things completely different. Hi, Charlie.
Hello, thank you so much for having me.
No, thank you for having me.
So Connie, I know you've spoken with Sarah before, who was obviously your first employee, and you covered a lot of ground there. So I think what's going to be great in this interview is kind of showing the audience exactly what it's like to be like even pre-first employee, and then really knowing where you want to change and kind of get investment. So I'm going to start out kind of asking you about your initial idea, and then we'll go into that. So what I would love to know is how you kind of came about with the idea of Astrid Miyu, and kind of what the steps were, the initial steps to get to that point of hiring Sarah.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I started my career in investment banking. Mm-hmm. I loved it, but I hated it at the same time. So I was there for 4.5 years, maybe a year too much.
Yeah.
I quit. I was burnt out. And then I came to London to go to business school to find myself. And whilst doing that, I was determined to get a job in fashion because I wanted to switch careers. I was thinking about what can I do better than everyone else. And I kind of thought, combined with investment banking experience, finance background, and a sense of, I guess, creativity and fashion, I could do well. So I did a stunt at LVMH. And when I graduated from business school, I just decided to start my own thing. I always knew I wanted to start my own business, and I felt ready at that point. And there was nothing to lose because I was a student. I didn't have a salary at that time. I didn't want to be, golden handcuffed by having a job and having to leave that job. So when I graduated, I was thinking about different industries within fashion. And obviously jewelry always had a special place for me because I used to travel a lot. I talk about this quite a lot, but my favorite pastime was going to markets and boutiques and haggling and buying jewelry with my mom and my sister.
Oh, that's so nice.
Yeah, so jewelry always has a special place in my heart, but I also equally loved apparel, shoes and bags. And when I kind of did a skim of the market, I felt like there were so many cool brands in apparel, and there just wasn't any gap. Whereas jewelry, I felt like there was a gap for branded jewelry that was well made, well branded. I think well branded was key, and well marketed and well designed, like all around. It just didn't exist. So that's where the idea came from. And the initial vision was to create a global cult brand. I didn't have a plan, but I had a vision that I wanted to make a really cool brand that parallels fashion brands because that didn't exist in jewelry.
Yeah, because I suppose LVMH is very much high-end brands, isn't it? So you have that understanding, I imagine, from working there on how to kind of captivate an audience with a brand. And what year was that exactly around?
So I graduated in 2011, and that's where I started ideating, and we launched the brand in 2012.
Yeah, because around that time, there weren't brands that were the kind of more affordable, but like you said, I suppose well branded, but more than costume jewelry and less than like a really expensive investment piece that might have cost you thousands of pounds if it was solid gold.
Yeah, that's correct. So the category we're in is called demi-fine. So we use sterling silver base and solid gold, and they don't cost a fortune, but they're still precious.
Yeah, and I suppose will last a lot longer as well. So in terms of those days where you were ideating, I know you said you didn't have a plan, and I think that can be quite important for people to know. How did you go from kind of literally that little seed of an idea that then became Astrid Miyu, and you decided the kind of style or the kind of person that you were going for? How did you kind of start putting in steps to get to the first piece of jewelry, like getting delivered to your house for you to see and feel?
I kind of have to think back at what I actually did because it's kind of a jumble at this point. But I think I came up with the name first because I wanted it to be kind of a lifestyle-y brand.
Yeah.
I wanted it to sound cool. And I wanted 2 girls' names. That's like, and then I did some research on names, and I wanted to have a Western name and an Eastern name. And Astrid is a Western name, Miyu is a Eastern name, to combine my background.
Yeah.
Because I grew up in the US, but I was born in Korea. So that's the name came there. And then I pulled out different aesthetics on Pinterest. The brands that I loved Japanese brands, I loved Nordic brands. So that was the initial aesthetics of
Yeah.
Astrid Miyu. And then I knew where to go for suppliers, because in Korea, costume jewelry manufacturing used to be huge in the 70s and 80s. And I knew where these suppliers were. So I found this one particular supplier who was completely different from all the other suppliers.
Yeah.
Typically, jewelry supply market is dominated by middle-aged men.
Oh, no way.
Yes. Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it?
interesting.
Because
Yeah.
it's such a feminine product, but
Yeah.
it's dominated by middle, like wherever you go globally.
Yeah.
But this supplier I met, she was around my age, and
Yeah.
she just inherited that business because her father passed away early, unfortunately, and she never wanted to be a jewelry supplier.
Wow.
But she was kind of keeping that business together.
Yeah.
She said she wanted to be a ski instructor.
No
She
way.
never dreamt of being a. So I think she was very inspired by what
Yeah.
I was doing. She was also very proud of me
Yeah.
as a fellow Korean, like being in England, in London, launching a brand. So she really bought into the vision.
Yeah.
And she supported me so much. So the initial designs I kind of like talked about or sketched, and she would just produce for me. And there were no minimum quantities because she was so proud of being part of this.
Yeah, because I suppose that's one of the kind of early things in, if you're selling a product with your company or whatever it is that it might be, if it's a physical thing, you have to pay up front to have the stock. So if that's a term that you can kind of negotiate, then that's a really good way of kind of getting into the market, I suppose, without having to spend thousands
and
of
normally,
pounds.
typically, if you were to start a jewelry brand and you go to the suppliers, minimum order quantities would be 100 or 200 units,
Yeah.
which is not a lot right now in our terms. But when you're starting out, you don't know how many you're going to sell.
Yeah.
And in fact, when I launched the website, we probably sold one a week from a friend or
Yeah.
family.
Oh, that's nice though. Like a kind
Yes.
of a real like home starting point. So when you had kind of, obviously you've had this idea and you said that you went to business school, I can imagine a lot of your experience in investment banking would have given you a good amount of knowledge, I suppose, in how business works, how finance works. You were clearly very good with numbers at that point. What was it that business school taught you that you didn't know before, and was that crucial for you to then be able to go and start Astrid Miyu, or do you think you could have done it without going to business school?
I loved going to business school, and I would repeat that if I were given the chance. But I think in terms of learning, I've learned so much more in the first year of starting Astrid Miyu than any of my business degrees, because I did 2 years of MBA and I did 4 years of undergraduate business degree.
Yeah.
I mean, it was good to do the MBA to meet so many friends, like-minded people, hang out, take some time out, but it was an expensive holiday for me.
Yeah.
It was definitely worth it because it gave me confidence to move to London and start a
Yeah.
brand in a location where I had no connections or like nothing.
Do you think business school, I suppose, in that aspect can be really good for those who don't necessarily want to start their own brand? It's not just for people, it's for people to kind of get into business in general.
Yeah, I think business school is really good if you want a change of career.
Okay, yeah.
For instance, like if you were working in a normal corporate job and you want to be a consultant, or if you want to be an investment banker, it's such a great way
Yeah.
to go.
Yeah.
It's not the best route for entrepreneurs because entrepreneurialism is very quick and
Yeah.
it can get academic, right? It's a school.
That's it. And I guess at that point as well, your kind of learning style, I suppose everybody is slightly different, but if you do well being kind of thrown in the deep end and learning while you're doing, then you'll learn a lot more, like you said, when you actually get started.
And also, early stage of the business is not necessarily about running a business. I think
Yeah.
I probably apply more of the business principles now, being a larger size business CEO. But initially, you have to take the photos. You have to go to the post office. So, I mean, I think you could be a 16-year-old and do all of that if you're willing.
Yeah, that's true. And you've got that kind of vision for exactly what it is you want to execute. So you're the sole founder of Astrid Miyu. Has a co-founder ever been something that's kind of crossed your mind that you want?
Yeah, absolutely. You get really lonely when you're a sole founder. So if I were to start another business, I think I'd be open to having a co-founder because I
Yeah.
think it will help alleviate all of that and help fill my gaps. And I'm like I guess, more aware of myself, what my shortcomings are now.
Yeah.
So I can probably find someone who
Yeah.
can support me and I can support.
Exactly. And I suppose as well, there is the kind of added benefit of, like you said, filling gaps, but also being able to kind of spread the workload so you can get maybe more done.
Yeah, and be a shoulder to cry on, because it gets really lonely.
Yeah.
You probably know.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think it's also just being able to vent sometimes, being able to just kind of get out what's on your mind and get a perspective, and making sure you choose the right person to do that too is quite important, but also difficult, because the responses sometimes you get are, don't go too hard on yourself, and you're like, I really wish that
that's not helpful.
No, it's not. It's not.
I think it would be helpful to have someone who has the full context, who's an equal to you.
Yeah, exactly. And you started off as an online only business, right? Is that right?
Yes, online business.
Then Topshop was a big change.
Yes.
For Astrid Miyu. By that, I mean you had I assume, started off selling through the website, and the marketing kind of came driving traffic there. How did you kind of find that initial audience? Because I suppose around that time, I remember that was my first year of uni, and social media was definitely a thing, but it wasn't what it is now, and it wasn't what it even was 10 years ago. So how did you get people to go to your website? Was it mostly through social, or that kind of Google ads maybe?
It was a combination of everything. So we didn't have any budget to do ads, but the first biggest investment I made was hiring a PR agency. So through PR, we had loads of traffic. So press was so powerful back then, 12 years ago. Yeah. It was a different landscape. The influencers are not who they are now. Social media is not what it is now. The first couple of weeks of launching the brand, we were listed on Grazia and The Stylist, which was a huge deal. And we were so lucky. Yeah. I guess we had a very clear point of view and completely different. The design and the aesthetics were completely different from what was in the market. So the press loved it. So that really drove and became a huge part of growing the brand. And that coupled with sending things to bloggers at that time. They were writing about their lifestyle, restaurant they went to, what they wore. So I worked with loads of bloggers and just sent gifting.
Yeah, and that was the time of being able to literally clickable links, because I suppose that hasn't really gone to Instagram, in that you can't see something and click it. You have to kind of, I suppose you can on stories now, but at the time you could go to a blog, click straight through and buy. So I suppose it's really seamless.
Yes. Yeah. It was very trackable.
Yeah.
And also Instagram had just started out. At that point, it was I guess Instagram launched in 2012, 2013. I got on it instantly. And I think the first year we grew to 20,000 followers. Yeah, so it was very easy to grow followers at that time.
Yeah.
I didn't know whether, we could monetize through Instagram, but I knew we had to be on it.
Yeah. So then when you were kind of, I assume, starting to build the revenue and the sales through the website, was that the point where you started to kind of question whether it could be in store? So I suppose maybe not starting out your own store, but being part of concession stands in places like Topshop, because that was something that you did.
Yes.
What was that decision-making process?
Another way of getting to market was doing loads of pop-ups. So I lived in Notting Hill at that time, and I knocked on doors of boutiques, beauty salons, to see whether I can do pop-ups. So I tried to do pop-ups every weekend, and that's how we kind of got the word out there. So if you look at our initial customer cohort, a lot of them are from W2 postcode, because I was holding these pop-ups in Notting Hill.
Oh, that's such a nice idea. And also, I guess you really you get a good view of who your customer is, and who's buying.
Yes, and you can chat to the customers and ask them how they've heard of us, whether they saw us through magazines or they just walked in.
Yeah, because also it's one thing, I suppose, going after a certain audience, and then the other thing actually achieving it and making sure that you're connecting with them. With Topshop, obviously, I suppose that's not quite as simple as going in and asking if you can put your jewelry in the store. How did that happen? Was it a kind of cold reach out email, or was that something that came off the back of, like you're saying, of press?
Yes, so it was off the back of a pop-up we did. So at this point, I can't remember exactly when this was. Maybe this was 3-4 years into the business. We had enough resources to do a pop-up in Piccadilly Circus. Wow. So it was a joint effort between different small brands. I think the Topshop buyer at that time happened to be in our pop-up, and she fell in love. I didn't remember her coming in. She never said that she was the buyer, but she bought our things and she fell in love and she contacted us. Oh, so great. It came by chance. So when you're out there, you don't know who's going to stop by. So just keep on being out there.
Yeah. Do you think that's like, I know obviously there's a lot of, I suppose, with Instagram being so different now, and maybe the high street is obviously there is a proof of it working because of Astrid and Miyu now, but I suppose it's cheap for them to start online. Do you think it's still important that they try and make those connections and they do those pop-ups?
Yeah, absolutely. Especially for products like jewelry where you have sentimental value and where you have to touch and feel. I think it's so important.
Yeah. So when you were kind of starting out, I know you said that your initial supplier was kind of really supportive of you, and I guess you were really lucky in that sense. How did that evolve? How long did you stay with that supplier? Are you still with them now? Like, what's that relationship and how has it changed?
We've worked with them until maybe 3 years ago. And it was a very small supplier. They had a small workshop. They just couldn't keep up with the demand.
Yeah.
So we had to part ways with that supplier, unfortunately. But I'm still friends with her.
Oh, amazing. Were you designing the jewelry from the very beginning with her and she was making it and sending it over?
Yes.
Yeah.
But I got a lot of help on design as well because I didn't know anything about jewelry. I didn't know anything technical, but she had a team of designers and she could do the CAD drawings, which is a technical drawing. So I would either talk about something or give her a reference or draw it out, do a rough drawing and sketch, and she would turn that into reality.
Wow.
So she was an extension of our team.
Yeah.
Because we have all of that in-house now, but I had none of that. It was just me.
Yeah. So when you're starting, I think it's really interesting and important for people who are wanting to start a brand or who maybe are in those early days. You not knowing anything about the jewelry trade wasn't the thing that kind of held you back.
No, I asked loads of questions. I was shameless.
Yeah. And I was going to say, I think a lot of people would have the preconception that they have to know everything to be able to start.
No.
So was that quite daunting to kind of say, well, I've seen this gap. I don't have much kind of experience here. I suppose at that point you're spotting the trends and then working with the supplier so closely to make it kind of come to life.
I don't think it was daunting. I guess like I was confident in my abilities to learn things and just ask questions. And I was just shameless. I went to a jewelry fair once to find suppliers and I just didn't have the jargons and the lingo. And this lady pulled me aside, bless her. She was like, you can't talk like that. You're going to get ripped off. And then she gave me all the vocabulary. Maybe she liked me. She thought like it was endearing that I didn't know anything. But you have people that help you along the way.
Yeah.
If you're open.
Yeah, not everybody's out to get you.
Yeah.
I suppose the key takeaway there is that you have to have trust and conviction in yourself over anything else at that point.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So before we get into the kind of the growth, the scaling and the investment side, you obviously are much more experienced now and you're able to kind of take a look back at early stage founding from your experience, but what you can see other people doing, I suppose. What do you think the number one mistake that early stage founders make?
I think not moving quickly enough, not thinking too much. Because when you're small and you're trying to overanalyze, you don't have enough data. You just got to go with your gut. So just overanalyzing, overthinking, and not moving quickly enough.
Yeah. So I suppose also just kind of being open and willing to test and
absolutely
having the time and the patience to do it, I suppose.
Because you don't have a lot to lose when you're like in an early stage. So just do it and learn from it.
Yeah, totally. So when you were I know you hired Sarah as your first employee and you've spoken quite openly. If somebody's listening and they've not listened to that episode, I think it's super important to go back and listen and hear kind of what that dynamic was. It was really nice to hear from Sarah. But obviously things then start to pick up when you've got a team and it's not just you. And I guess you are responsible for people. So naturally things might become a little bit more intense. But what was that kind of change for you and the brand in terms of, okay, well, we've had our top shop, we're doing the pop-ups, we've got quite a good online business now. How did you kind of make sure you carried on with that momentum, but you also had your sights set on where you wanted to be in like another year's time?
I think changing my mindset from being a founder to CEO was a huge one. So as a founder, you're an athlete. You kind of dip into everything. You're doing everything. You're kind of the star of the show. But a CEO, you need to step back and you need to let other people be the stars. And you're kind of stepping back as a coach or like a manager of a sports team.
Yeah.
So I think the founder needs to make that transition first so that the team can flourish. and then get the team in order. Have a, really good vision and direction, but don't overbear them. Give them loads of autonomy so they can thrive and move quickly as well.
Yeah, you do get to a point, if you want to scale and you want to grow, you realize quite quickly that you can't do it all. And the more people you hire to take on different roles means the more redundant you are, which I think some people might feel uncomfortable with that. But the more you can take yourself away and it can serve itself without you, that's a good sign, right?
Yeah, exactly. And there's plenty of things to do when you step out, because when you're in the weeds and doing the doing, you don't have time to plan and be imaginative. Whereas if you leave that room for yourself, if you offload everything, suddenly you have so much freedom to think and plan the future, come up with a vision, and do things differently.
Yeah, because it becomes kind of on business rather than in business work,
absolutely.
which is so important. So I think it was around year 3 of Astrid Miyu you decided to get investment. Is that right?
Correct.
I suppose, again, a lot of that will have come with planning, knowing what you wanted to achieve. But at what point did you think, okay, I need to raise or want to raise? And how did you start that? Did you kind of pull together a deck and just cold email people, or were there kind of contacts that you knew?
I decided to raise investment in 2015, so 3 years into the business, as you said, to open our first permanent store. So I did loads of pop-ups, as I mentioned, and I knew that this would work if we opened a physical store. So I had my eyes set on this small unit in St. Christopher's Place, which is still there.
Oh,
And
that's so nice.
Yeah, and I wanted to raise enough money to pay for the rent, do the shop fit, proper shop fit, not just IKEA furnitures, like how I did my pop-ups, and also invest a bit on marketing, because at this point, influencer marketing and social media was getting a lot of traction, and I wanted to invest more to pump that out. So I put together a rough deck, and I had an elevator pitch in mind, and I just spoke to friends that worked in startups and family members who could kind of look at this and refine the deck. So that was a very short process, and I'm used to putting together the decks because that's what I did in investment banking. It's like deck and financial models all the time.
Yeah. Good experience.
Yeah, so I had this, and when I started telling people that I'm raising money, they started introducing me to different people. And I've met VCs, private equities, and we were too early for them because we were quite small. And then angel investors and individuals. So that's how I met my initial investors.
Yeah. Was that quite a daunting process in terms of kind of going out there? Maybe you were used to it in investment banking. I know it's quite a kind of intense industry as it is, but was there a lot of time that you spent kind of pitching and it felt quite relentless? Maybe I know some people kind of say it is.
Yeah, it was relentless. It took about 6 months from initial deck preparation to money coming into the bank account, because you have to kiss a lot of frogs, especially if you're in a lifestyle category where investors weren't like too aware of, especially jewelry. No one knew of a big jewelry company. So you had to give them a lot of references. People would be like, oh, I like you, but I'll maybe consider if another investor comes in. So I think it was just like a lot of that. And then if it takes 3 months from initial meeting to like going back and saying, oh, hey, like this guy's interested, you've just kind of lost momentum as well.
Yeah. So 6 months was the kind of the beginning up until you had the cash to be able to go to get the rent on the shop.
Yes.
So when you're pitching, if there's somebody listening now who is considering investment, or they've kind of seen it's something that they might want to do for the scaling purposes, what do you think the most important thing to go into these pitches with is? Obviously, you've created the deck.
Yeah.
I can imagine a lot of it is, and we've heard from other people who are on the podcast, that the founder is really important, that there's a relationship there between the investor and the founder.
Yes.
So you can go in there with an amazing deck, but if they don't like you, it could be tricky. So what should the mindset of somebody going into those pitches be?
I think you should just go and relax as yourself, because people want to trust you, but also with a lot of positivity and I guess confidence, because they also want to believe in you and go on a journey with you. So you need to sell the dream. without it being too like overly ambitious. So it's a
Yeah.
combination of both. You need to be authentic but super ambitious.
Yeah.
In terms of the energy that you bring. And in terms of the deck content, what they want to see is competitive landscape. I know a lot of founders think I don't have any competition, but like that's the worst thing you can
Yeah.
say. I think like just laying out and, you know, letting them know that you understand the market, telling them what your USP is versus the competitors, that's very important. And then another thing is like how much you're raising. Obviously all the number, how much you're raising, what the valuation you're thinking is. And what you're going to use that money for. That's super important.
Yeah, that's one thing I think I've seen. I know there's like a lot of kind of resource online now, I suppose, in terms of support for people and what decks need to say. I think one misconception is that you might want to kind of pluck a number out of the air and say, well, that's roughly how much I want to spend, and then I can do X, Y, and Z. But you need to make it very clear how you're going to spend that money and why it's important to spend in those areas.
Exactly, because they want to know that you have a vision, but also a plan.
Yeah, that's so true. You need to actually get it done.
You need to do big picture, but also small picture as well.
So what were your big worries kind of going into those meetings? What were you kind of thinking, oh God, what if they ask this, or what if this doesn't come off? Like, what was the thing that was kind of plaguing you the most in that process?
I don't think I had any worries going into the process. I was quite relaxed. I don't know why, but I was quite relaxed. So there were no worries. But I guess like deep inside, the worry post like investment would have been, oh, if I do get investment, am I going to completely lose my independence and autonomy? So that was my worry.
Yeah.
So what will come after the investment was a worry. But I never like went into a pitch being worried or scared.
Yeah, because that's I suppose a really interesting point in how much you're going to give away, as you just said. How much are you willing to hand over for the money that you need in order to be able to kind of action the plan that you've put in front of them? So the valuation side, for somebody who's not ever considered that, or it's a very much a seedling idea, how would somebody go about getting that valuation?
I think you need to ask seasoned investors. Because it really depends on how much they're willing to pay.
Yeah.
And then aggregate it a little bit, because you have to create demand, don't you?
Yeah, and working backwards with it, I suppose. So when somebody's kind of in an investment pitch, what can they expect? What sort of questions can they expect to get from if they're selling a product like you were?
I guess how big is the market opportunity? Because investors are at the end of the day coming in for a return. So what's the market opportunity? And if there are any comparables, for instance, Pandora is a listed jewelry company, and I think they're the only listed jewelry company.
Oh, really?
I think so. I mean, I can't think of any.
And by listed, you mean on the stock market?
On the stock market.
Yeah.
So there is a price for that business. And, you know, it's a multi-billion dollar business. So having that in the presentation or having that in mind was very important for them to be able to visualize how big this market can be.
Yeah.
So that's one question they always ask. Competition, like I mentioned, is something that they always ask. If you say there's no competition, they will not like it. They'll like shred you.
Yeah.
And, you know, your forecast. What your vision is in 5 years, how big you think this company can be, and how you're going to get there.
So for product-based businesses, when you're kind of, I suppose, building that 5-year plan or building what the end result is, do you think that it needs to be either the end results are getting on the stock market, so maybe going public, or selling to a bigger corporation? Are they the two things that you think people should be looking to achieve in the long run?
Yeah, so when an investor comes in, they will ask you for an exit plan because they're coming in to make a return. So there are different avenues, right? You can list on the stock market, which is a very long-term journey from an initial seed investment, or you could sell to a big corporation, or you could sell to private equities. There are so many private equities at different stages of the business. So that's the common route a lot of founders will take.
Yeah. I imagine your initial set of investors were angel investors.
Yes.
Can you just explain exactly what that is? Because there's a big difference between an angel investor and VC.
Yeah, absolutely. So an angel investor is a wealthy individual who's, who want to ride on the journey with you. They're typically retired, or they might not be, and they believe in you as a person. So building that personal relationship is so important. I spoke to Gary in our previous episode, and Gary is an angel investor. He's invested in multiples of businesses. So someone like him is a great angel investor.
Yeah, because it's their personal money at the end of the day.
It's their personal money. Yeah. Therefore, it's also a personal relationship. So being able to get on with that person
Mm-hmm.
is very important. They're in it for the return, but they're in it for the long haul. And when you get angel investment, the founder is in the driving seat mostly.
Yeah.
They want to support you and cheer you on.
Yeah.
So that's angel investor. And a venture capital will typically come in with a lot more money. I mean, like an angel investor, you typically go for like 500,000 to £1 million raise in aggregate. A VC would maybe put in $1 million or $2 million, but their growth expectation will be very high.
Yeah.
I mean, you'd be pressured to exit much more quickly.
Yeah. And also from a VC point of view, is it correct in thinking that's often pooled money in terms of if you went to a venture capitalist, it would be a pool of money that are from a set of investors as opposed to it just being one person with all of their money going into it, like the angel investor?
Yes. So a venture capital is a professional institution. Investors. So there are managers that you'd be speaking to, engaging with, but they're pulling money from pension funds, or it could be from teachers' pension, like loads of different institutions that you would never interact with.
Yeah.
And they're representing a pool of investors. That's correct.
Absolutely. If somebody's kind of thinking, okay, well, what's my exit plan going to be? How would you advise somebody who has never done that before and who is maybe kind of in a middle point of, okay, well, I want to get investment. I've got the pitch deck. I need to figure out exactly what that last point is. If it was a fashion brand, let's say, there's a lot of different brands, I suppose, or businesses that they could sell to. Maybe LVMH could be one of them, for example. How would they be able to kind of do their market research to say, okay, well, I think this is the right exit plan, or this is the way that we should be working towards. That's what the goal should be.
In terms of exit plan, I don't think you need to have a very specific exit plan. That's like, I guess my first like 2 cents or 5 cents. And if you really wanted to know, I guess you can look at conglomerates, fashion brands or companies that acquire different. So you could go into like acquisition, like fashion brand acquisition, or you could find a corporate finance advisor and just chat to them and get some market knowledge.
And I guess at that point you would probably already have a really good kind of view of the market and what the competition would be and what they've previously done and how you can kind of follow in their footsteps, I suppose.
You could also find a brand that you admire in your category and try to find out who their owners are, if the founder is not an owner, and try to reach out to them.
Yeah. So with Astrid Miyu then, you've kind of gone through this pitching process. As soon as you'd kind of secured the amount of money that you needed, what was the kind of first step for you in that at that point? Was it you obviously went and got the store? You had to hire people to run the store. Like, what was that moment like to kind of say, okay, well, we have to make this store profitable now?
I had confidence that it will be profitable because we just needed very small stores and the rent was affordable. In St. Christopher's Place, we weren't going to Oxford Street. The risk was quite well managed. And I hired an incredible retail manager at that time who was kind of like owning it. She was, acting like an owner in terms of managing that store. So I was quite lucky in that sense as well.
Yeah. Did you spend a lot of time in the store as well, or were you mostly kind of behind the scenes at that point?
I spent a lot of time initially in the store, but mostly I left it with this like amazing retail manager.
So you've got your first store. You've got stores globally. I suppose, how difficult was it for you to assess further markets than just the UK to know whether that was kind of the risk you wanted to take or whether you just wanted to stay in this territory?
Yeah, so the beauty of an online business is you have so much data. You can see where your customers are coming from. And because we started as a digital first brand, when we kind of like went into the US, 70% of our business was online. So we had that data. We knew we had customers and fans out in the US, in particular New York and LA. So in 2019, we decided to host a couple of pop-ups. So we ran 3 pop-ups and they were phenomenal. We had queues lined outside and we were creating so much momentum and buzz. And I knew it would work because we tested it through online, but also through physical pop-up. So it was a no-brainer when we opened post-COVID.
Yeah, so it's kind of going back to how you did it before in terms of like testing everything out in that way. And it's quite nice, I guess, even though so much of the landscape has changed of probably how you run the business, that kind of core pop-up and being in person with people was still so important
Yeah,
to
it's
you.
so important. You can't
Yeah.
lose touch with your customers.
Yeah. So do you travel quite a lot now then to be able to, I suppose, assess how markets are doing? I know you went to New York recently. Was that to see how everything was so you could expand further?
A bit of everything. I've been going once a quarter. I've got such a great team. I've got a team based here, but I also have store teams out there. So the teams here go out there quite regularly. We probably go out from head office once a month. You know, equally, we have a great store manager, great store team out there.
With your investment, was that with further rounds, was that kind of one of your, you've proved the market in the UK, you've proved with the data that you've got customers over there. Was that your kind of next step to say to investors, we want to go to the US and have physical stores?
Yes, that's part of it, but also UK stores, because at that point we only had 3 stores in the UK. So UK expansion was a huge part of getting that next
Yeah.
investment. So I got that next investment in 2019. So 4 years from the initial angel investment,
Yeah.
and all of my angel investors made a huge return
Yeah.
when the new institutional investors came in.
Yeah.
That was part of it as well. So to give a return to my shareholders, but also expand
Yeah.
in the UK mainly at that point.
How many angel investors did you have initially?
Around 20.
Are they all 20 of them still investors now, or did they
No,
sell?
a lot of them exited in 2019
Yeah.
when we had the institutional investor, but
Right, yeah.
we have a couple left.
So what's your kind of, I suppose, exit plan then? If you've kind of got yourself to this point, you've got global stores. I suppose there's,
Yeah.
unless you go to space, I suppose there's not much more you could do rather than kind of keep on having more. So what's
Yeah.
your exit plan?
It's always up in the air. I could, either get it because, my current investors are institutional investors. They would want an exit at some point. So
Yeah.
it would probably be driven by that. I'd probably have to find a great partner, either corporate or financial partner that I go with. I haven't decided yet
Yeah.
on a clear path.
Yeah, it's exciting.
Yeah.
So going back a little bit, I know you said you had around 20 investors. How many pitches do you think that you did to get those 20? And did you strategically choose those 20 for what they could bring and kind of benefit you and Astrid Miyu?
I did 6 months of pitching, but then I got most of my investors through one pitch event. So I pitched in front of 200 angel investors.
Wow.
And I guess because at that point I honed my pitch quite a
Yeah.
bit. Like I heard feedback that it was a great pitch, and I had loads of investors coming to my stall, and I created a lot of momentum. So when you're raising investment, momentum is so important because everyone wants in on like what everyone else wants. So we
Yeah.
were oversubscribed. So I raised a lot more than I had initially planned to raise because I had a lot of interest. I don't think like I was very strategic in picking the investors. Don't get me wrong, they were all like super nice, but they were giving me a lot of support and like cheerleading at that point, and I
Yeah.
needed like a certain amount of money.
Yeah. So with your investors that you ended up having, did any of them have a lot of demands attached with, obviously aside from the transaction of a certain percent for how much they were going to give you? Did you have any experience of investors asking for very specific things from you in a certain amount of time or anything like that?
No, not necessarily. I was quite good in like reporting back to all the investors every month on how the business is progressing, what I'm doing. So I guess like the communication really helped, and I
Yeah.
had board meetings every quarter. I think I was quite lucky.
Yeah.
I haven't had like strange demands or weird demands.
Yeah.
For the investment.
And I think that highlights the importance as well of moving into more of that CEO role, because you don't have time to be doing everything else while also kind of collecting everything that you've been doing to be able to report back to them on how their investments make a difference.
But I think proactive communication is really important.
Yeah, totally. You can't just hide. Before we come to the end then, I think it's really good for us to go over more of a mindset, maybe more of a holistic approach to investment, scaling, starting a business. What do you feel is, and I know we've spoken about this before, the most important thing? I know you're going to say grit. From developing grit, I think there's kind of conscientiousness, there's confidence, perseverance. What do you think is the kind of most important thing to remind yourself of when you're on a journey of entrepreneurship?
You need to have a very clear vision, but you also need to be very open-minded. And sometimes they're very contradictory. To have a clear vision, you need to be quite stubborn and you need to be very confident. To be open-minded, you have to be very humble. So I think balancing those two things are so important. You need to know what you stand for, but you also need to listen. and be willing to learn from others.
Yeah. When you're saying about vision, I think one thing that can be maybe quite difficult for people to do is write down exactly what that vision is. Do you think it's an important exercise for a founder to take time out to really hone what that is? Especially, I suppose they would have to before investment. But did you have something that was kind of written down, like Astrid Miyu's vision is ...
I hadn't written anything down, but I had a very clear vision. I wanted to make this a cult global brand, and I wanted to do things completely differently. And I don't think I've ever strayed away from this. So it is very important to have a clear vision. I'm not sure whether you need to take time out of your business to have this, but it is very important.
The mission, the vision, the purpose comes from the reason why you started in the first place, right? So that can be a really good place to start.
And I think the vision just comes. It needs to be something like you really believe in, you're passionate about. I don't think you can like make something up.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. My penultimate question, every business or business founder will have tough times. You don't start a business thinking it's going to be easy, that's for sure. How have you navigated really tough times, and what have you learned from those tough times that's kind of carried you through that you've had to kind of remind yourself of and use, I suppose, as a bit of a coat of armor?
I think it's really important to be open to go through difficult times, open with yourself to be able to articulate what the difficulties are, also be open to your team so you can share the load and for them to own it as well. And also be open to getting help. So I, sought out an executive coach back in 2019 when I was struggling with team, when I was struggling with growth. And that's really helped me grow and navigate through tough times.
Yeah. And the last question for you is, how do you balance life and work? I know you've got 2 young daughters, and I can imagine that's very busy as it is. And I know that you didn't have any children when you first started. So you've navigated early motherhood twice now. How do you strike a balance?
Oh, it's difficult. You can't ever get that balance. I'm still working on it.
Yeah.
I have no margin in my life, also because my husband has a very demanding job. Getting loads of help, whatever help you can get, and getting the right partner is the foundation.
Yeah.
So if you don't think your boyfriend or whoever is going to be supportive when you're going through this journey, don't marry them.
Good advice.
That's the foundation, but you really need to be disciplined in your calendar. So I put everything in my calendar, even my personal things, like even like PT or playing with children, like play dates, everything's in my calendars.
Yeah. Do you tend to kind of take time out of the normal working hours to do what you need to do to be able to kind of keep going? Like you said, PT. You don't just set that to kind of doing it super late at night.
That's correct. So I used to think, I need to do it before work, 7:00, and I'll do after work at 6:00. It never works.
Yeah.
Because you want to have a lie-in, and then you're too exhausted after work. So I just slotted in between. Now I started doing PTs at 11 a.m.
Yeah.
And, if you do 1 hour of PT, you gain 2 hours back because you have so much more energy and you can focus a lot more.
Yeah, and clarity. I once heard, I think it was in a book that I'd read, it said you can have it all, just not at the same time. And I think that's exactly what you've just said. You just have to manage, be really intentional with your time, accept and seek the help, and don't be dating.
Yeah, and also don't confuse input with impact.
That's so interesting. Yeah.
Think about impact, not input.
Yeah, love that. Thank you so much, Connie. I think that's going to be really helpful for people wherever they are on their journey. And you are such an inspiration. Obviously, you've created such an incredible cult brand. You've done what you've set out to do, and you're still on that journey. So yeah, thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Charlie. This was really fun.
Yeah, it was.
Thank you so much for listening. Don't forget to follow the podcast wherever you're listening or watching. You can follow me at Connie Nam, Astrid Miyu at Astrid Miyu, and Unboxed Instagram page at Unboxed_Founder Confidential. See you next week.